Look, guys, let's be real for a second here. The DCU isn't failing, not in the way the previous regime was. The quality is there, the vision is clear, and we finally have a plan. But it's also not breaking through. It's not dominating the conversation the way a universe filled with gods and monsters should. And to me, that's a massive problem. Because if there's one thing we've learned from the rise of the MCU or even the peak years of Star Wars lore, it's that these franchises weren't built on safety. They were built on absolute risk. They were built on bold, let's see if this works storytelling. But right now, the DCU feels like it's checking boxes. It feels like it's playing things just a little too safe. We're getting, solid content, but are we getting legendary moments? So we're going to dive deep into why the DCU needs to stop wading in the shallow end and start swimming with the actual sharks. Now, before we get into this, okay, number one, I am not a DCU hater. A lot of y'all like just jump on the DCU wagon so hard. I love DC. I love Superman, and I love James Gunn. I am a fan of a lot of his work, so this isn't coming from hate. And also, I read more DC comics than probably 99% of y'all anyway. So, like, I am a true and true DC fan. And this critique that I'm giving isn't because I want James Gunn fired, but it's because I want him to fix what is going on and actually make bold moves. So, we are talking about DC's problem, and the problem is they are not being bold enough. This is your boy Stevie Hayes. This is the Loreverse, and let's dive into this. Now, let's start with the blueprint here. The one project that actually, felt like it was swinging for the fences, and to me, it was Superman. I'm not just talking about the character, I'm talking about the concept. What made it bold was instead of giving us another Clark Learns to Fly origin story, which we've seen a dozen times, Gunn went bigger. He dropped us into a world that was already alive. We didn't start at zero, we started in a universe that was already populated with heroes. Even, seeing characters like Hawkgirl, Mr. Terrific, Guy Gardner existing alongside Superman immediately changed the lore. It made the DCU feel like a lived-in ecosystem. It wasn't an empty world waiting for a hero. It was a chaotic world that already had a story. And that is a bold narrative choice because it trusts that the audience, is keeping up. There was a weird comic book energy too because they didn't shy away from the Silver Age craziness. We're talking Crypto the super dog actually looking and acting like a dog. We're talking about the Fortress of Solitude being grand and alien. We're talking about Superman robots, literal mechanical duplicates. This stuff used to scare the life out of movie studios. They thought it was too weird or too comic booky for mainstream audiences. But leading into that weirdness is exactly what makes DC special. And this matters because Superman worked, and it worked because it felt like a statement. It was a risk. It told us this universe isn't going to look like a gritty military drama. It's going to look like a comic book brought to life. It set a tone. But since then, that momentum feels like it's been stalled. Now, compare the big swing of Superman to where the rest of the slate is heading. Suddenly, things start to feel off, a little grounded, a little too quiet. Peacemaker season 2. Don't get me wrong. I love Christopher Smith. I love the humor. But as a major pillar of a new cinematic universe, Peacemaker season 2 feels like it's playing in a sandbox that doesn't affect the rest of the beach. And the pitfall from a lore and world building perspective is like, what are we actually getting? No major universe expansion, no big earth shadowing consequences, and no real shift in status quo. It's great TV, but it's safe TV. In a shared universe, especially at the start, every project needs to matter. And if a story doesn't push the needle forward, it really has a risk of becoming filler. And the DCU cannot afford filler in chapter 1. This brings us to the next project, Creature Commandos, which was good, but not impactful. And the reception has been solid. I mean, people dig the animation and the voice acting. It's good, but the hard truth is, does it feel essential? There's a difference between good and important. There's a massive difference between a good show and an important event. Think about the Mandalorian season 1. That was essential lore. It changed how we saw the Star Wars galaxy. And Creature Commandos, while fun, it does feel isolated. It contained a story about a niche group of monsters, and it doesn't move the overall narrative of the DCU whatsoever. It doesn't create must-see momentum for the next film. And, it's really safe because if you miss it, you haven't really missed anything. And if the DCU wants to compete with heavy hitters, they need to stop making side quests and start making main story missions. Now, let's talk about the wild card, though. Green Lantern, the Lantern Show. We were promised a true detective style, mystery grounded storytelling that eventually scales up to the cosmic level. And this is the DCU's biggest opportunity to prove they can do scope. And look, the reason why this could work is because the Green Lantern mythology is arguably the deepest lore DC has. We are talking intergalactic politics. We're talking the emotional spectrum. We're talking space sector wars. We're talking a literal army of freaking space cops. The Green Lanterns are stinking awesome. But the problem here, the marketing and the hype. they're almost non-existent. There's no clear identity for this show yet. If they play this too safe and keep it as simple as, earth-based murder mysteries, they're going to waste the biggest asset they have. This needs to go big. It needs to show us the Guardians, the core, and the sheer scale of the DC cosmos. And if it doesn't, it's just another cop show with a glowing freaking ring. Then we have Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow. The source material is great, guys. This is a Tom King comic masterpiece. It's emotional, it's dark, and visually, it's unlike anything else. It's a space western about a girl who watched her world die and stayed alive out of spite. So what's the issue, though, right? The issue is everything we've seen or heard so far suggests that they are just smoothing out the edges. When you take an edgy, unique comic and try to make it fit into a safe movie mode, you lose the soul of the story. And if you adapt something incredible, but you don't elevate it or take risk with the tone, you just end up with a diet version of a great story. And the DCU shouldn't just be Marvel with DC characters. It needs to be its own bite. Woman of Tomorrow needs to be a visual and emotional gun punch, not just another superhero adventure with crypto in it. Let's talk about what bold storytelling actually looks like in this universe, because different isn't enough, okay? These movies have to be ambitious. Think about this. Clayface as a horror film, right? The rumors of the Clayface movie I think are cool. A shape-shifting monster would be great. But here's the question. Is it bold enough? What would be bold? Because I think you could go even bolder, right? Don't just make it a monster movie. Make Batman a terrifying presence in it. Show Batman from the perspective of the villain. Make the Dark Knight look like a supernatural force of nature that is hunting this man down. Another example, why not combine worlds, right? Why is a Supergirl training with the Amazons on the mascara? Why isn't a supernatural threat like Eclipso pulling Superman into the dark corners of the magic world? That's ambition to me. That's lore weaving. That's how you create moments that fans will be breaking down in a frame-by-frame analysis for years. You have to stop treating these characters like they live in silos and start treating them like they share a backyard. Because right now, it feels like the DCU is choosing projects based on what scripts are ready rather than what stories actually matter for the growth of the universe. And the reason why that is dangerous is because when you lead with scripts instead of lore milestones, you end up with B-list characters leading projects that no one asked for, disconnected stories that don't feel like they belong in the same world, and zero central momentum. The audience doesn't just want content. They want good writing. They want events. They want to feel like the world is changing every time a new movie drops. So the truth is simple here. The DCU doesn't need to copy the MCU's formula, but it does need to remember how the MCU started. It started with a guy in a suit of armor fighting a tank, a massive risk at the time. Bold storytelling builds universes. Safe storytelling just maintains them. And right now, the DCU isn't building yet. It's hovering. It's waiting for permission to be great. And if James Gunn wants this universe to actually rival the greats, he has to stop bunting and start taking bigger swings. Because the next era of DC won't be defined by what worked. It'll be defined by what dared to be different. So what do you guys think? Is the DCU being too cautious, or am I just being impatient? Let me hear about it in the comments. Stay legendary, stay crispy, and peace out.